having the conference, Minister Keith Muhammad. He is a student minister of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. He serves the Oakland community as representative of Minister Farrakhan at Muhammad Mosque 26B, where he also established the Muhammad University of Islam, instructing children K-12 in history and religious studies.
Can we get the minister to come up? Thank you. Just want to say also that the murder of Oscar Grant inspired him to organize weekly town hall meetings to encourage the community to unite, fight, and stand for justice.
Every important event in the lives of the righteous begins by calling on the aid, the guidance, and the help of the Almighty. So I begin in the name of Allah God, the beneficent, the merciful. I bear witness that there is but one God. I bear witness that Muhammad is his messenger. I am a student of the teaching of the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and I could never thank Allah enough for his giving us the honorable Elijah Muhammad and his sharing with the honorable Elijah Muhammad a helper, one blessed by the Spirit of God to help us to better understand his word, life, and mission. That helper is the man that I'm honored to represent to you, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and it's in their names I greet all of you. With the greeting words of peace, we say it in the Arabic language, Assalamu alaikum. Those that may be not as familiar with these words, they are spoken in the Arabic language. And they mean simply in English, peace be unto you. These were the very words often spoken by Prophet Jesus whenever he met and planned and worked to give guidance to the disciples. That he wished them peace coming in, and he wished them peace going out. And I know that all of us are here today have been brought together because our peace has in fact been broken. I want to thank all of the organizers of today's event. Can we give a big round of applause to Special thanks to Uncle Bobby for informing and inviting me to share some of our experiences from the Bay Area with you as it related to the assassination of Oscar Grant. One of the themes that rang clear from each and every one of the families that we've heard from, and from all of the families that we have not yet heard from, is that when our children are slain by law enforcement, there are immediate shortcomings with how the world is informed of what happened that has been borne witness to by each and every one of you. Not in a single case did law enforcement, through its internal affairs divisions, speak to you and say that law enforcement was wrong.
That's right. That's right.
Even in the case of Johannes Messerly, we found that while his murder of Oscar Grant was videotaped, rather than to stand before the world and say that law enforcement was wrong, the chief of BART Police sent money or organized for the gathering of money for his officer, Johannes Messerly, while he was locked up in Santa Rita County Jail. And rather than pursue justice in an unjust murder, the chief of police signed his name on a private document that became public, thanks be to God, that they were asking the rest of the BART police officers to send money on the books of Johannes Messerly so he could buy an extra candy bar at the county jail, so that he could have an extra supply of tissue at the county jail. In other words, the system of justice that we thought was to serve justice for the people did not attempt to serve justice in the murder of Oscar Grant. And unfortunately, because we are so hopeful that the society that we are in has our best interests at heart, that sometimes we follow along with whatever the society dictates, even though it is absolutely wrong. We just choose it. We're like lovesick pups. As if the system that has oppressed the people has ever been right by you. Now, I want to speak as directly as I can. We don't have a lot of time to play. When we stood for justice in the murder of Oscar Grant, his was not the first, nor has it been the last case that we've seen. But if we study the response of the people and the community to his murder, certain elements came into play that we could never have calculated for. Prior to his assassination, members of the community that are often set on the outside by the media as some sort of rabble-rousing activists were already gathering together in order to address the situations that are most prevalent where we live. We know that where we live under gross disparities. When we look at the economic condition, for an example, the average wealth for a Caucasian family in America is over $100,000. The average wealth for black families in America is nearly zero. They may recite the number to be about $5,000, but many of you sitting here right now don't make $5,000 in 1 month and let 1 month paycheck be challenged, and many of us in this room will be faced with a 3-day or quit notice. So most of us in this room are on the verge of homelessness, and most of us in this room are renting where we live. And if you are attempting to buy where you live, you've already been affected by redlining. Your interest rates are higher, and your foreclosure comes much faster. Is that a fact? Yes. So we were gathering on the morning of January the 3rd of 2009. In that time, a men-only town hall meeting to address the many disparities that we find in the communities where we live. There's an incarceration boom that has led the Supreme Court of the United States of America to declare that the state of California is in violation of our constitutional rights and is guilty of cruel and unusual punishment. There's an educational failure where our children are attending schools, and more than half in Oakland are not graduating high school. We've got the lowest of test scores. America, while boasting to be the greatest nation in the world, one really has to pose the question, what measure are you using? In San Jose, a few days ago, the city government declared that it wanted to fight homelessness. They didn't fight homelessness by giving homeless people homes. They fought homelessness by rolling in on a tent city and tearing down the homes of 150 people living by a creek. They fought the homeless, not homelessness. Yeah, they fought the homeless, not homelessness. You're exactly right. under the Nixon administration, there was a declared war on drugs in America. And it seemed that the war on drugs didn't arrest any manufacturers of drugs, any importers of drugs. The war on drugs found as its #1 victim poor, black, and Latino people and led to an incarceration boom unlike the world has ever seen. The only time in human history that you can match the enslavement of what happened in the war on drugs was the capture of black people to be made slaves 400 plus years ago. That's the only match that you can find with that reality. So we were gathering. And even though we were gathering in a room of men making a conscious effort to address the issues, we were affected by the mind of white supremacy. What mind is that? It's the mind that poses the question when we consider what happened to our native brothers here in America when the pilgrims came and stole the land and murdered the people and laid language, culture, and religion on them that came from foreign places. It was the mindset that posed the question, what did the Native Americans do wrong? As if Columbus came to correct a wrong that we had done. When Oscar Grant was murdered, we just learned of it the morning of that meeting. It reached the newspaper print. Yet, unfortunately, we had yet to see the video. And even in this conscious raising audience, many of the men's first reaction was, what did he do wrong? Most of the families testified that when law enforcement murdered their children, among the first things they did was criminalize your children. So our poor family of Mario Romero, to look in the news and be told that your loved one is a parolee. That, in other words, that's an excuse for shooting. And by the way, since when did the law say if you're on parole, that's worthy of the death penalty? That's right. Later today, you'll hear from Judge Reynoso, who was driven out of office in the California State Supreme Court in the Republicans' rise to power with Governor Dumazian, who was driven out of office by a political conservative campaign that was angry with him for not implementing the death penalty enough. So since they couldn't find death penalties at San Quentin, evidently there are many that have chosen to take the law in their own hands on the streets against the people of the state of California. So when the men began to ask what happened to Oscar, unfortunately, many said, what did he do? And meaning, what did Oscar do? Did he break the law? Was he a gangbanger? Were his pants sagging? Did he have any tattoos on his body? Did he have any drugs on his person? He must have been a runaway drug dealer who just lost control in the eyes of these decent and good police officers. Quite frankly, you're here because you know better. That's why you're here. But I heard statements spoken by many saying that we are all one. But unfortunately, that's not true. That's not true. Before the pain of loss in our families, we thought ourselves to be all different. The pain of loss in our family made us to grow up and understand quickly that injustice and the demand for justice is what is making us one.
That's right.
And so in the murder of Oscar Grant. As you know, I am a Muslim, but what does that mean? It only means I'm one who wants to obey God. We didn't know Oscar. We hadn't met his family. But by God's grace, there were dozens of passengers aboard the BART train who carried video footage of what happened to Oscar Grant, and before it came into the possession of law enforcement, it went into the public view. If you'll watch, law enforcement gaining possession of the murder of your loved ones means that you will not see what they have captured until you get to court. Unfortunately, even though law enforcement in America murders nearly 2 people a day, that's the wrong number. Once every 36 hours, a black person is killed by law enforcement. That's the wrong number. I don't know how many of those murders are captured on tape, but I can tell you this: if law enforcement gets their hand on the tape, you have to go to court to wrestle it out of their hands.
That's right.
So on that evening of January the 3rd, after we heard about what happened with Oscar but knew very little of it, the videotape went viral over YouTube. KTVU television in Oakland became an award-winning network for its breaking that footage. Well, that footage showed us all what many refused to believe.
That's right.
But by God's grace, many refused to let our eyes lie to us on this occasion. So the many who often would take the side of law enforcement as though they're professional truth tellers. They're not professional truth tellers. In fact, for many, it's quite the opposite. They've learned how to say nothing and something at the same time. Have you ever seen a police report and how empty it is as it relates to the murder of your children? In fact, someone said this earlier. The media has become a proponent for the lying of the police. You learned about this recently, unfortunately, in Boston. That as the news unfolded over what happened in Boston, the FBI stepped in and chastened the media to remind them that how you report is going to affect the security. And then they told you that the surviving alleged bomber had a massive shootout inside of a boat. Y'all remember that? Yeah. And they said that the man who lived in the home opened up the boat, looked at the man, and he didn't fire a shot. In fact, he said he was laying in a pool of blood. He was unconscious. Otherwise, he'd have fought his way against whoever opened up the boat. Then they told you when they moved in, there was a shootout. You all heard that, right? Well, did they scream it loud and clear that that man had no gun? Come on now. No. So you didn't hear he didn't have a gun. Well, that case provides us a graphic example of exactly how the media has been used to present whoever law enforcement murders as a criminal. Now, I don't know the guilt nor innocence of that man, but you know the innocence of your children.
That's right.
But now, moving forward, information share. I'm very grateful to have with us a representative of the only national black newspaper left in the country. It's called the Final Call newspaper. Sister Charlene Muhammad, she covered many of the you have some available for you on your way, and I want you to stop this thought that we carry. That's a different religion. I can't read it. Now, I don't even know what they call a newspaper in Oxnard. What do you call it? Trash. Good answer. And what's the religion of the trash propaganda paper? Lies. Money. The religion is lies and money. If you get the LA Times here, what's the religion? If you get the Examiner newspapers, what's the religion? Advertising dollars. So the religion is based in greed and manipulation of the people. We absorb information from circles all over the place, and we never stop and pose a religious question. So when you see the final call, and you see a smiling young man or woman trying to share it with you. In fact, you don't have to pay for it. Go finalcall.com and download the multiple articles that reveal these kind of incidences happening all over the country and world. There's not another paper that matches it, quite frankly.
That's right.
Now, how were we able to develop information share? I found, just in an observation, that the murder of Oscar Grant was covered more than almost any other incident I've ever seen covered in the final call. It was that important to the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan that on his way toward attending our annual national convention, he normally takes a retreat to study and prepare himself. But on his way to Chicago, he made a stop in the Bay Area where he was scheduled to host an event in San Francisco. We diverted the event in San Francisco. He came to Oakland where we gathered in a Christian church.
That's right.
The Olivet Institutional Missionary Baptist Church, hosted by our Reverend Gordon Humphreys, who made his church ground really holy ground for the revolution. He made his facilities available for the community need. And by doing so, he never asked us for a single nickel. We offered him money. He refused to take it because he wanted that his church be a central place for organizing for justice for what was good, right, and proper for the people. So week in and week out, there were Christian pastors and people that gathered. There were Muslim pastors and people that gathered. There were atheist people who gathered. Y'all with me now? There were political people that gathered. There were socialists that gathered. Now, what we have to do today is learn. Let's stop being so divided from one another on the basis of a label.
That's right.
I can't talk to you because I'm trying to figure out your ethnicity. I can't speak to you because I'm trying to figure out your religion. I don't want to deal with you because I don't understand what you call your political stand. I was with a man the other day, yesterday, an activist who proclaimed himself outwardly, say, I am an atheist. I said, well, sir, what's better? Somebody who says that he believes and does nothing?
Okay.
Or somebody who says what's good and does something? You're better off with somebody that's doing something of good than you are with a hypocrite who declares they believe and stand for nothing. So we organized weekly meetings like this one. We invited families and individuals who suffered the boot of oppression so that the community could learn collectively the information that was really needed to be known. Very difficult to fight for a cause you have no knowledge of. Ask the Vietnam vets. You don't want to find yourself in a fight for a cause you have no knowledge of. We have to gather as much information as we can so that by the time you take your stand for what is good, proper, and right, you never should feel, I don't know what I'm standing for. We know exactly what we're standing for. And as we were blessed to stand with the family of Oscar Grant, we came to the realization we know this case better than the DA does. And it was true. And as we sat
fact, during the trial, there were occasions we wanted to reach across and tap the DA on the shoulder and say, no, you missed that point. In fact, we would take him in the hallway between sessions and say, Mr. DA, you need to, prosecutor, here's a point that you could have clarified better. In other words, we must do our due diligence. We have to know as many of the details and facts of the cases as we can. One thing you'll discover is many of our great attorneys, they're not DAs. In the case of the murder of Oscar Grant, we challenged the district attorney because when we all watched the murder of Oscar on video, the DA said and did nothing. We were blessed to have enough political friends and took the wherewithal on January the 7th, I believe it was, the day of Oscar's funeral, to go and demand a meeting with the then district attorney. In that meeting, which he was frightened to have and did all he could to resist, but he was overwhelmed by the demand made by activists from the community. He was overwhelmed because that demand included prominent pastors in the city. It included prominent political figures in the city. And by the time we were able to get him in the room, inside that room was a representative of Mayor Ronald Dellums, who had been chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. In that room were representatives of Assembly Member Sandre Swanson, who had been chairman and was chairman at that time of the California State Black Caucus. In that room were representatives of Congressperson Barbara Lee, who was chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus at that time. But most importantly, in that room were people who loved justice enough that we refused to accept the DA's answer of no to a meeting. So there were over 100 people in his lobby. He was scared to come out of his office. He was scared to face the people. But we were blessed to convince him. And when we held that meeting in a conference room in his office, he said to us that it was his intention to pursue charges for the murder of Oscar Grant. Now, most of you whose loved ones have been lost, the DA dismisses you like some old wet tissue. And they say to you that the murder was justifiable homicide. So other than Oscar Grant at that time, there had never been one of these cases where the DA said that we should bring charges. Let me tell you something about the then DA, Tom Orloff of Alameda County. He had been in the district attorney's office for so very long. I see my brothers here from the Brown Berets that in some ways were inspired. I'm sure had some working relationships with the Black Panther Party. Is that correct? DA Orloff was one of the prosecutors for the Panthers and for Huey Newton. In other words, he had been in office just that long. And when he ran for election in Alameda County, he generally ran unopposed. Now, some of the greatest black defense attorneys had their beginning in prosecutor's office. The great late Johnny Cochran found his early career in a prosecution office. The attorney for the Grant family in almost every case in the Bay Area found his beginning, John Burris, in the prosecutor's office. But you don't find, when these elections occur, that there's hardly any black people that desire to be a prosecutor. So in Alameda County, whoever runs for district attorney normally runs alone. They run unopposed. So the person who would replace the district attorney who quit under the unrelenting pressure of the public, we challenged him on January the 14th in one of those public rallies that they tell you was a riot. On January the 14th, we raised the challenge as a result of town hall organizing. And the challenge was that the district attorney should retire, the district attorney should resign, or the district attorney is going to face a recall effort of the voters of Alameda County. We filed the forms, and every time Alameda County found a way to kick the forms out. The last time, the Oakland Tribune found a way to kick the filing out by their refusal to publish the official filing for the recall of Tom Orlaw. A few weeks later, he retired. Yeah. So much pressure was placed on the governing board of BART. There was no way that the police chief who raised money for a murdering cop could keep his job. So within a few weeks of time, he retired. Yeah. So we're looking at the effect of unrelenting public pressure. Now, we were blessed that in that there were elected officials, and let me say this, that the community must be well informed. Mayor Ron Dellums, who did his best during this circumstance, and I would say during his mayoralship, the two things that he would be known for best is his stand ever so gently by the side of the family of Oscar Grant and his refusal to allow Oakland police officers to find every way to clock in overtime hours to murder your children. So when he directed the resources of OPD to go out of all these overtime payments, a few weeks after Oscar, there were 4 police officers killed in Oakland, allegedly by a man by the name of Lavelle Mixon. When the funeral for those officers arrived, the police officers union was so powerful that they rejected the mayor of Oakland to have anything to say at the funeral, public funeral, at the arena where the Warriors play. The overflow crowd was so large that there were thousands of people in the stadium where the Raiders play. But the real sight to see that day was the sight of hundreds of armored personnel vehicles of multiple law enforcement authorities from all over the northwestern United States that were making a demonstration and a show of power to say to poor people, don't you ever raise your hand up against law enforcement. And after the funeral, they took those armored personnel vehicles and rolled into East Oakland, into the area where Lavelle Mixon was killed, and those officers were killed to say to young black people, don't you ever raise your hand up against us. Now, a few days ago in Oakland, in the Acorn housing community, again, after what was known as Operation Nutcracker just a few years ago, which brought 400 officers into a housing complex that doesn't have many more than 400 residents. They came in at that time with flashbang grenades, throwing them into the homes of families with babies in the houses. Early morning raid was Operation Nutcracker. And after Operation Nutcracker, the police came out and boasted with the then Attorney General, now Governor, once Mayor of Oakland, Jerry Brown, bragging about their show of force. Should your children have to wake up in the morning and see cops dressed like they're in the battlefields of Iraq with tanks coming into their front door? No! See, it is our duty to learn of what's going on. be inspired by what we learn, and then organize our communities wherever they are in order to meet and overcome the obstacle called injustice. In closing, the Bible in the book of Isaiah declares that justice stands afar off and equity cannot enter because truth has fallen in the street. I've heard the term used today called extrajudicial killings. I think that's a fancy way of just saying murder.
That's right. Yep. That's right.
There's no such thing as extrajudicial. Either we will get justice or we have not gotten justice. There's no in between. So when the scripture says that justice stands afar off and equity cannot enter because truth has fallen in the street, I'm reminded that in the book of Psalms 94 and 20, David the psalmist says, "Shall the throne of iniquity have fellowship with thee, which frameth mischief by law?" We're literally looking at mischief makers who are perhaps doing what they were born to do. That's why they seem to be so good at it. You're not a naturally good liar. Those who lie in this room, lying is not your nature. But if lying were your nature, you'd be pretty good at it. If you sing naturally and you practice, you get pretty good at it. If you run fast and you are in shape and you practice, you can get pretty good at it. Well, what about liars? See, we're looking into a face of a system that have literally lied to us for hundreds of years. This is what we must do. One, we have to reorient our thinking. While you may feel alone in your stand against injustice, you're not alone. You are not in the minority. We are actually the majority people of the planet. So when I talked about these false labels that we use, they cause division among us. Paul in the Bible said, there's no Jew, there's no Greek. There's no bond, there's no free. There's no male, there's no female. All are one in Christ. One may say, well, what does it have to do with me if I don't know what to think about Christ? Now we're dealing in principle. What principle is that? The principle of justice. As thou hast done, the same too shall be done unto thee. The principle of justice does not know race. The principle of justice does not know gender. The principle of justice does not know nationality. Justice is justice. And if there are men who are filling San Quentin for murdering people now, then what about these 2 murders a day that are occurring all over the country? They're not all justified. We understand that law enforcement is very difficult work. We got that. But you are not justified in being a madman, a berserker, going wilding on poor people because you just don't like them. When that officer that you can see on YouTube murdered Ernesto Dueñas, he knew who he was killing. When that officer murdered Mario Romero, he knew who he was killing. The problem is, in their minds, they were not killing another human being.
That's right.
In their mind, they are taking down savages and animals. See, we now have to stand up and demand and command our human rights. We are victims of human rights violations. And we have to make these violations known. This is a military time. Imagine, I was driving around this morning. I've never been in Oxnard other than passing through on the highways. We go shopping, and somehow they always pull a military recruiting base somewhere in a shopping mall. They see our poor children who can't find work looking for a job, and rather than go to the mall and get work at Target or work at Starbucks, we find ourselves in the military recruiting center because they said you could never find a job in society, so be all that you can be in the Army. Be careful. You be careful. They offer you a job to kill. That's what the job is for. So don't you ever think that after you finish being trained to kill and you come back to Oxnard to find yourself on the police department, that you've forgotten your military training. And we learned when the murder of Oscar Grant in police training, it's the same as military training. They don't have any training that says point a gun at you to scare you to stop running. They're trained in this language. Never train your weapon at a target that you are not prepared or willing to destroy.
That's right.
So when that gun comes out at you, destruction is on the mind of that officer. He's no longer a peace officer. Once that gun is in his hand, his intention is to kill you.
Execution.
He is not shooting to slow you down. He does not fire warning shots. Every shot that is fired is intended to kill you and to strike you in our children center mass.
That's right.
Do I have that correct? Any police officers here?
Former.
I got that correct? That finger is on the trigger. And don't take the finger off the trigger and say he's only 15. They had a chance in Oakland 2 weeks ago. They claimed that somebody robbed somebody at a restaurant and ran up the street. Some young people. Law enforcement detained a group of 15-year-olds without weapon and without question. A police officer pulled out his weapon and shot a 15-year-old in the face. It was only by God's grace he didn't shoot too straight, so the bullet grazed him. The chief of police came out days later saying, oops, when in fact the district attorney should have been out saying, we're charging you with attempted murder. You fired on an unarmed 15-year-old. Guilty of nothing. But in the mind of those that have been in authority, as I close, you know, we want to be respected as citizens. And that's whether your families were born here or recently immigrated here. But you just have to know that the black community, having come by way of the slave process, we've been here hundreds of years. And never once have we been given the full right of citizenship. President Obama is fighting for his rights. So anytime you find that we have to have a civil rights organization that tells you we don't have it, it took 100 years out from slavery and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to even be permitted to vote. Yet someone would say to us that we're citizens. We're called citizens mockingly. You're a citizen when we need you to go to war. We're a citizen when we're fighting against the Vietnam Army. We're a citizen when they like us to go down to Iraq. But when you walk down the streets of Oxnard, you're not a citizen. You're an unlawful, undocumented, illegal alien. That's not even a human. An alien is not a human. And this is why it's become so easy to shoot us down, because they look at you and your desire to be an American more sometimes than we desire to be ourselves. When this country was founded, we weren't considered Americans. You all know that, right? And if you want to know the nature of a thing, study its beginning. in the original seal of the United States of America, there were 6 European countries that were said to comprise those that would be known as the Pilgrims. They came from England. They came from Holland. They came from Ireland. They came from France. They came from Germany. They came from Italy. They didn't come from Africa. They didn't come from South America. They didn't come from the Caribbean. So when they defined who was an American, you had to be one of the European descendants of that shield. Well, we're here now. We're here now. And we're fighting against those that have really thumbed their nose at your equality. So the only way that we will ever achieve what we seek is to organize. The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said to us that organization is more important than truth. Now, I held up our newspaper because of its value of spreading a message of truth. Organization is more important than truth because a disorganized lie, an organized lie, has more power than disorganized truth. So these families who are getting acquainted with one another in our cases, we have to lift the level of our organization. And if taking families to Sacramento en masse will help bring information, inspiration, and organization to our movement, then we say we're with you. Let's get on to Sacramento. May Allah bless and keep us to organize, organize, organize. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Minister. Powerful note. Okay, so we have some changes, and we're going to get ready to kind of